When we begin to ask whether we are experiencing love or manipulation, the first place to look is not at grand gestures or passionate declarations. It is at the quiet mathematics of the relationship. Not the kind of mathematics that counts every favor or measures affection like a transaction, but the deeper balance of emotional investment. Healthy love has a rhythm of mutuality. It breathes in and out. One person gives, the other receives, and then the movement reverses. Over time, both partners experience themselves as contributors to the relationship, not merely beneficiaries of it. In a relationship grounded in genuine love, effort flows in both directions. It may not always be perfectly equal. Life rarely works that way. There are moments when one partner carries more weight. Illness, stress, career demands, family pressures. These realities shift the balance temporarily. But the important word here is temporarily. Over the long arc of the relationship, both people step forward when the other needs support. They participate. They show up. When manipulation enters the picture, that rhythm begins to break. You may notice that you are the one who constantly adjusts. You are the one making time, solving problems, offering emotional reassurance, or providing financial or practical help. Your partner, meanwhile, seems comfortable receiving all of it. They may express gratitude in the moment, but the pattern rarely shifts. The relationship begins to resemble a one-way current rather than a shared exchange. Psychologically, this imbalance is not always obvious at first. Many people who give generously interpret their behavior as love. And indeed, generosity is an essential ingredient of intimacy. To love someone is to care about their well-being, to invest energy in their happiness. But generosity becomes exploitation when it consistently flows in only one direction. One of the most subtle signs of this dynamic is how responsibility is distributed. In a mutually loving relationship, responsibility for the emotional climate of the partnership is shared. Both partners care about how the other feels. Both notice when something is wrong. Both take initiative to repair tension or conflict. But when someone is using you, responsibility quietly shifts onto your shoulders. You become the emotional manager of the relationship. If there is distance, you are the one who tries to fix it. If there is conflict, you are the one who apologizes or smooths things over. If your partner is unhappy, you feel compelled to solve it, even when the problem has little to do with you. Over time, this creates a strange psychological distortion. You begin to feel that the health of the relationship depends almost entirely on your effort. And because you care deeply, you work even harder to sustain it. But a relationship that survives only through one person's constant effort is not partnership, it is dependency. Another important signal lies in how each partner responds to the other's needs. Love naturally awakens curiosity about the inner world of the other person. When someone loves you, they want to understand what matters to you, what hurts you, what excites you. They pay attention. In a one-sided relationship, however, your needs often feel secondary. When you express a desire, it may be minimized, postponed, or reframed as inconvenient. Your partner may appear attentive when they need something from you, yet strangely distant when the attention must flow in the opposite direction. The result is an emotional asymmetry. One person is deeply engaged in the relationship, the other participates primarily when it serves their immediate interests. And here is where many people become confused. Manipulative relationships are rarely devoid of affection. There may be moments of warmth, passion, or connection. In fact, those moments often keep the dynamic alive. They create hope. They convince you that if you just give a little more, be a little more patient, understand a little more deeply, the relationship will finally become balanced. But love is not measured by occasional intensity. It is measured by consistent reciprocity. Real love is not only about how someone treats you when they need you. It is about how they show up when you need them. It is about whether your vulnerability is met with presence or with absence, whether your efforts are mirrored or simply absorbed. In the end, the most reliable question you can ask yourself is remarkably simple. Do I feel like a participant in this relationship or like its sole caretaker? Because love is not meant to feel like carrying someone indefinitely on your shoulders. Love is two people choosing, again and again, to carry the weight of the relationship together. Once a relationship begins to lose its sense of mutuality, another pattern often appears, one that is far more psychological and far more difficult to detect. It is the use of guilt, emotional pressure, and subtle coercion as tools of influence. Manipulation rarely arrives as aggression. It is rarely loud, dramatic, or obviously hostile. In fact, it often disguises itself as vulnerability, disappointment, or even love. Many people imagine manipulation as someone controlling, demanding, or domineering. But in intimate relationships, it is often far quieter than that. It can appear in a simple sentence that carries an invisible weight. If you really loved me, you would do this. Or, I guess I just care more about this relationship than you do. What is happening in moments like these is not simply communication. It is emotional leverage. Healthy relationships allow room for disagreement. They allow space for two people to have different needs, different limits, and different boundaries. When someone says no, it may be disappointing, but it does not threaten the foundation of the relationship. Manipulation, however, transforms boundaries into accusations. The moment you assert your limits, the conversation shifts away from the request itself and toward your character. Suddenly, you are not simply declining a request, you are failing a test of love, loyalty, or commitment. This is where guilt becomes a powerful instrument. Guilt is one of the most socially effective emotions we have. It evolved to keep human relationships intact. When we hurt someone we care about, guilt encourages us to repair the connection. In healthy relationships, this emotion supports empathy and responsibility. But in manipulative dynamics, guilt is not a natural response to wrongdoing. It is intentionally triggered in order to influence behavior. You might notice this pattern when a simple boundary leads to a disproportionate emotional reaction. You say you cannot help with something, and suddenly your partner becomes deeply wounded. They may withdraw affection, become distant, or emphasize how much they have done for you in the past. The conversation subtly shifts until you begin to feel that you have somehow betrayed them. And so, to restore harmony, you give in. This is the quiet cycle of emotional pressure, not force, but persuasion through discomfort. Not direct control, but psychological influence. Over time, the person on the receiving end begins to anticipate this reaction. You start to calculate your responses carefully, not only based on what you want or need, but on how much emotional fallout might follow. The question is no longer simply, what do I think is right? The question becomes, how upset will they be if I say no? And this is the moment where manipulation begins to reshape the psychological landscape of the relationship. Your autonomy becomes entangled with their emotions. Instead of making decisions freely, you begin making them defensively. You try to avoid triggering disappointment, anger, or sadness in your partner. Gradually, your own boundaries soften, not because you changed your mind, but because maintaining them feels emotionally exhausting. Another common strategy involves reversing responsibility. When conflict arises, the manipulative partner may frame themselves as the injured party, even when they initiated the pressure. The conversation turns toward their feelings, their sacrifices, their frustrations. The original issue, your boundary, disappears from the center of the discussion. What remains is your growing sense of obligation to fix things. And because most people who care deeply about relationships are empathetic by nature, this dynamic can be very effective. Empathetic individuals are especially sensitive to the emotional states of others. They do not want to cause pain. They want harmony. Manipulation exploits exactly that impulse. But there is an important philosophical distinction that often goes unnoticed. Love invites. Manipulation obligates. When someone loves you, they can express their desires openly. They can say, "This would mean a lot to me." They can share their hopes, their needs, even their disappointments, but they still allow you the dignity of choice. Your freedom remains intact. Manipulation, by contrast, quietly removes that freedom. It makes your decision feel morally loaded. Saying no begins to feel like failing the relationship itself. The irony is that genuine intimacy cannot exist under those conditions. Intimacy requires authenticity. And authenticity requires the ability to speak honestly, even when the answer is no. If every disagreement becomes an emotional trial, honesty slowly disappears, and with it, the possibility of real connection. So when you find yourself consistently agreeing to things out of guilt rather than desire, it is worth pausing and asking a difficult question. Is this love asking for understanding, or is this pressure asking for compliance? Because the difference between the two is profound. Love respects your boundaries, even when it wishes they were different. Manipulation teaches you to abandon them. Another moment of clarity often appears when we begin to look closely at how our feelings are received inside the relationship. Not simply whether we are allowed to express them, but what actually happens when we do. In a healthy partnership, emotional expression is not treated as an inconvenience. It is treated as information. When you share that you are hurt, stressed, uncertain, or in need of support, your partner may not always respond perfectly. No one does. But there is at least an effort to understand. There is curiosity. There is engagement with your inner world. Love, at its core, involves the willingness to enter the psychological landscape of another person. It means recognizing that their experiences matter even when they are different from our own. But in relationships where one partner is being used, a different pattern slowly emerges. Your feelings begin to feel excessive or inconvenient or poorly timed. You may notice that whenever you bring up something that matters to you, the conversation quickly shifts away from it. Perhaps your partner minimizes the concern. They tell you that you are overthinking, overreacting, or being too sensitive. Perhaps they redirect the discussion toward their own difficulties. Or perhaps they simply disengage, offering a vague reassurance before moving on to something else. The message may not be spoken directly, but it becomes clear through repetition. Your emotional needs occupy less space in the relationship than theirs do. This is one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences a person can have in intimacy, because when our feelings are consistently dismissed or ignored, we begin to question their legitimacy. You might find yourself rehearsing your thoughts before sharing them, trying to make them sound more reasonable, more concise, less emotional. You begin editing yourself in advance, anticipating the possibility that your concerns will be brushed aside. And gradually, something even more troubling happens. You begin to silence yourself. This silence does not appear overnight. It grows quietly. Each time you decide that bringing something up is probably not worth the argument, not worth the misunderstanding, not worth the emotional distance that might follow, so you tell yourself you will let it go. But the human psyche does not simply erase unmet needs, it stores them. Over time, what accumulates is a subtle emotional loneliness. You may still be physically present with your partner. You may still share daily routines, conversations, even moments of affection. But internally, you begin to feel increasingly unseen. And feeling unseen inside a relationship is one of the deepest forms of isolation. What makes this dynamic particularly confusing is that the partner who dismisses your needs may still expect you to remain deeply attentive to theirs. When they are stressed, frustrated, or upset, your support is assumed. Your listening is expected. Your empathy becomes part of the structure that holds the relationship together. But the same attentiveness does not return in equal measure. This creates what psychologists sometimes describe as an emotional asymmetry. One person becomes the primary caretaker of the relationship's emotional life, while the other occupies the position of primary recipient. And yet, because the caretaker role can feel meaningful, because it allows you to express love, loyalty, generosity, you may not immediately recognize the imbalance. You may even take pride in being the strong one, the understanding one, the patient one. But strength in relationships is not meant to be permanent endurance. True partnership distributes emotional responsibility between two people. Both partners should feel that their experiences matter, that their inner worlds are welcomed into the conversation. When this balance disappears, the relationship begins to resemble a performance rather than a connection. One person listens, reassures, and adapts. The other continues, largely unchanged. There is also a philosophical dimension to this dynamic that is worth considering. To be loved is not only to be cared for, it is to be recognized. Recognition means that your thoughts, your feelings, your vulnerabilities are acknowledged as real and significant. They are not treated as distractions from the relationship. They are part of the relationship. When someone repeatedly dismisses or ignores your emotional experience, they are not simply avoiding a conversation. They are refusing recognition. And without recognition, intimacy becomes fragile, because intimacy depends on the courage to reveal oneself and the trust that the other person will receive what is revealed. If that trust disappears, people stop revealing themselves. They remain present, but they stop being known. So if you find yourself in a relationship where your feelings are consistently minimized, where your needs seem to vanish the moment they are spoken, it may be time to ask a difficult but necessary question. Am I being heard or merely tolerated? Because love does not make you feel like a burden for having emotions. Love makes you feel safe enough to share them. At some point in many relationships that feel confusing or unbalanced, people begin to cling to a powerful hope. The belief that things will change. And often, that hope is not entirely irrational. The partner may apologize sincerely. They may promise to do better. They may even show moments of genuine effort. For a brief period, the relationship feels lighter again, almost like the version you believed in at the beginning. But if we want to understand whether we are experiencing love or manipulation, we have to learn to pay attention to something more reliable than promises. We have to pay attention to patterns. Human beings are incredibly persuasive when they want to maintain a dynamic that benefits them. Words are flexible. Intentions sound beautiful when they are spoken. Apologies can be heartfelt. But the true architecture of a relationship is not built out of words. It is built out of repeated behavior. Patterns tell the story that intentions sometimes hide. When someone genuinely wants to change, their actions gradually reorganize themselves around that desire. Change may be slow, imperfect, and inconsistent at first, but there is visible movement. You begin to notice different responses in situations that used to follow the same script. New effort appears where indifference once lived, but in manipulative dynamics, something slightly different happens. The apology becomes part of the cycle rather than the end of it. A conflict occurs. You express hurt or frustration. Your partner apologizes. They promise things will be different. For a short time, they behave in a way that restores your hope. And then, almost invisibly, the old pattern returns. Perhaps the emotional pressure reappears. Perhaps your needs are once again dismissed. Perhaps the balance of effort quietly shifts back onto your shoulders. When it happens, it rarely arrives as a dramatic betrayal. It feels more like a slow gravitational pull toward the familiar. And because you remember the apology, because you remember the moment when they seemed sincere, you give the pattern another chance. Psychologically, this cycle is powerful because it mixes disappointment with intermittent reward. Moments of kindness or attentiveness appear just often enough to keep the relationship alive. Those moments become proof that the person you hope they are still exists somewhere inside them. But consistency is the real measure of character. Anyone can behave well for a few days after a difficult conversation. Anyone can offer a beautiful explanation of their intentions. The real question is, what happens once the urgency of the conflict fades? Do the changes remain when there is no immediate pressure to maintain them? This is where observing patterns becomes essential. Patterns reveal what someone repeatedly chooses, not what they briefly promise. Another important dimension here is how a person responds to accountability over time. In a healthy relationship, feedback gradually leads to adjustment, not because one partner is perfect, but because the relationship itself matters enough to inspire growth. When manipulation is present, accountability often produces a different response. The person may apologize, but the underlying behavior persists. Sometimes the apology becomes increasingly sophisticated, more persuasive, more emotionally expressive, but the structure of the relationship remains unchanged. And eventually, the responsibility for believing in those promises shifts onto you. If you question them, you may be told you are being unfair, impatient, or unwilling to trust. But trust does not grow from words alone. Trust grows from reliability. Reliability is what allows two people to relax inside a relationship. It is what makes emotional safety possible. When someone repeatedly demonstrates that their behavior aligns with their commitments, your nervous system begins to settle. You no longer feel the need to constantly evaluate whether the next disappointment is around the corner. Without that reliability, relationships begin to feel like emotional negotiations that never quite end. There is also a philosophical truth worth considering here. Love is not only a feeling, it is a practice. It is something we do repeatedly, through our choices, our habits, our responses to one another over time. This means that love cannot exist only in moments of intensity. It must also exist in ordinary behavior, in the small decisions that reveal whether we truly take the other person's experience seriously. When someone consistently fails to transform their promises into sustained action, what you are seeing is not a temporary mistake. You are seeing a pattern, and patterns, more than promises, reveal the reality of a relationship. So if you find yourself holding on to words that never quite become visible in everyday life, it may be time to shift your attention. Stop listening only to what is said. Begin watching what is done, repeatedly, quietly, over time. Because in the end, love does not prove itself through promises of change. Love proves itself through change that no longer needs to be promised.